Hello everybody, Mark Schaftlein with you, and this is the Schaftlein Report. It's Thursday's edition, and we're broadcasting bi-coastal from Irvine, California, and from Long Island, New York. Jeffrey, happy to have you back with me today on this momentous day in the relationship between Israel and the United States. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
You know, I have to say, folks, and we always like to cut through the propaganda on this show. As an American citizen, I was exceptionally proud of the speech that President Biden and, most importantly, Secretary of State Tony Blinken delivered. Blinken particularly standing next to Benjamin Netanyahu, relating the position of the United States fully supporting Israel and relating to his position as a Jew and as a father, and in a very touching, emotional reminder to the Israeli people of the unequivocal support that the United States has for the people of Israel in dealing with this horrific situation. Jeffrey, as a Jew, what were your comments and your reactions from Secretary Blinken and President Biden?
I was proud of both of them. It was not something I've seen from an administration before. And they were emotional in their presentation. And, you know, some of us have problems with Biden and Blinken. There's no problem there. And the actions that they've taken, the ships coming close to Israel, the weapons, everything they've done has been for Israel. But those speeches, they weren't just speeches. What they did is not only did they rally the Israeli people, but they were telling the other neighbors like Iran and Lebanon and Jordan. Well, Jordan wouldn't do it, but watch out. We're here.
Yeah, I thought that was super important. And, you know, what I most viewed also, Jeffrey, was the diplomatic corps of Israel, past and current, past, former officials, all basically sang the same song relative to the United States commitment. And I thought that was very important. We're going to talk about some policy difference and disagreements later in the show. But for right now, on starting a positive tone with it, I thought they struck just the right tone in an incredibly difficult situation. I mean, you know, a lot of people in Israel, Jeffrey, and I've seen the reports, are still trying to assess what happened and how it happened. And we'll get into that a little bit later. That, you know, there are some early indications of that, but for right now,
Yom Kippur War in 1973, they're still trying to figure out what happened.
Well, I've got some insight which I'm going to share on that. So, look, Benjamin Netanyahu has rightfully associated Hamas with ISIS. The terror tactics Hamas used are identical to the ISIS tactics. You know, I hate using the term violates every rule of war, but it does. I mean, these were clearly terrorist activities. There's no ambiguity here. We don't need to repeat all the things that many of you have already seen on network television, podcast, and streaming. So I'm not going to go there. I really want to look forward and see what's going to happen from here. But
I know people who had to go near that kibbutz that people talk about with all the bad thing, and they say the smell of death is horrible.
Yes.
And they were going inside.
Yes. You know, even for a country hardened by previous attacks, this was an over-the-top piece. Now, what's happening right now? There's 360,000 Israeli soldiers that are massing on the border. As to when they'll go in, I don't know. Obviously, the Israeli government is taking extraordinary steps, despite criticism from a handful, I stress this, folks, a handful of radical liberal Democrats in Congress, none in the Senate other than Sanders, but they are doing everything they can to prevent these civilian casualties. But the fact of the matter is, when you get ready to lay siege to a territory, the only way to avoid this is if the civilian population leaves. And the problem with that is you have the Hamas leadership telling them to stay, and the Israelis dropping leaflets, making phone calls, telling them to leave. You know, some may leave, some may stay. In any conflict, there's going to be additional civilian casualties. And I'm going to go back to previous conflicts the United States has been. You know, it took 2 nuclear weapons to end Japan's involvement in World War II. It took a siege, literally bombing out the city of Berlin at the end of World War II to end Germany's involvement. So if for those who are in the left-wing media, and I'm not going to even point them out, they're so disgusting, who think this is going to be a, quote, surgical operation, no, it's not. It's going to be a leveling operation. Massive amounts of buildings are going to be destroyed. Terrorists are going to be killed. And yes, there will be civilians that are killed. Men, women, children, elderly, you name it. It's going to happen. And that happens anytime a country's at war. So brace yourself for it.
And that's the difference between Israel and Hamas. When citizens die in the West Bank and what do you call it, where the Hamas is, it's an accident. It's collateral damage.
Right. Yeah, no.
Hamas went over the border with one thing: they wanted to kill Israelis. That's it. They wanted civilian casualties because they thought that then Israel would give up, and they purposely went in on a Saturday that was also a Jewish holiday at 6 a.m. so they can kill more people.
Well, I know the comments have been misconstrued, but you know the fact of the matter is the operation, as disgusting, vile, and inhumane as it was effective from their perspective. Now, where does it go from here? How do you make that judgment? Only time and the Israeli response will tell.
Well, that's one of the big arguments. Is Israel going to go into Gaza and retake it, or are they just going to go into Gaza and kill all the Hamas leadership?
I don't think you can do one without the other. I think the only answer here that's acceptable to the Israeli people and the Israeli leadership, of which a unity government for the purpose of fighting this war has been formed, is the complete annihilation of every single Hamas fighter, government center, buildings, facilities, weapons, and that is no easy task. So I feel that is what Netanyahu has clearly spelled out what the policy is going to be. And I have a saying: when leaders speak, listen to them. You know, there's already reports coming out about Israel was warned about this by the Egyptian government of all places prior to it happening. I don't know if that's true or not. There were ominous signs in the post-mortem, which we can get into later, about how they were able to breach the security apparatus so easily. Again, I don't want to get into that right now. Let me ask you a question, Jeffrey. In your opinion, are U.S. Special Forces operations taking place in this fight?
No, only as advisors.
Only as advisors.
Israel has a tradition of not having people from other countries, soldiers from other countries, fight the battles for them.
Understood. I have seen reports that U.S. Special Forces are engaged. To what extent, I don't know. Likely on an advisory type basis is what I would estimate based on what you just said.
Don't believe anything in the papers. And that's something I always say. But in this case, unless it's backed by the IDF or the government, consider it a lie.
Right. I agree with that. I agree. That's why I asked that. That's why I asked that question. Now, I do want to get into something controversial right now. And that is, news just broke that the United States, in working with Qatar, is going to refreeze that $6 billion that is sitting in a Qatari bank account. The problem I have with it, and I respect John Kirby, he's a very good spokesperson for the administration and for the situation. However, when pressed on how long would the fund, he was very evasive on that. It almost sounded like at a certain point in time, those funds will be freed up. Jeffrey, what's your take on that?
I think they won't be unfrozen until the end of the war. And then I got to tell you something. All the support of Israel is going to change also once the war is over. But you mentioned John Kirby. Do you remember his first press conference after the war started? He was crying.
Yeah. Yeah. John Kirby's he's a stand-up military guy. I have no issue with John Kirby. How he's answering these questions, he was told to answer by the White House. So he's representing his boss. It's tough when you are trying to maintain your credibility, which he has, and sort of evade questions. But for the time being, I'll side with the administration and say at least they did the right thing at the request of bipartisan senators and House members to refreeze this money. Now, in the future, depending on what they determine on the Iranians' involvement, again, these funds are supposed to be used for humanitarian purposes. Maybe they're going to find a way to eventually make that happen, although money's fungible. But
really taking money and putting it in one pocket, and they can spend money with their own money in another pocket?
Well, I got to tell you something. When Trump was president and he had sanctions on him, they weren't getting $60 billion a year in oil revenues like they are right now. And the Iranians are selling their oil to the Chinese and whoever else will pay for it. And unfortunately, under Trump, that didn't happen. The country was effectively
getting our own money from oil.
Absolutely. So, anyhow, that's the economics.
The press secretary of the president, Karine
Jean-Pierre.
Yeah. She yesterday blasted all of the squad. If you look at her history,
I saw it.
She wrote op-eds in like Newsweek blasting Israel. So really, if she wasn't working for Biden, she'd be there with the squad people.
Well, I don't know whether she would or wouldn't, but those people have been clearly isolated. Those members, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, AOC, whatever the other guy's name was, the New York representative, those four people have effectively been I mean, the Democrats aren't going as far to criticize them, but they have been called out by the White House effectively, which I think is appropriate. I mean, you can have your opinion supporting Palestinian people, but just like some unnamed left-wing news organization, these people are terrorists. They're not militants. They're not fighters. They're terrorists. And they're killers and murderers. There's no other way to call it that, folks. That's what it is.
One reporter they followed down the hallway.
Oh, I saw that. That was disgusting. The mark of a true, in my opinion, she should not even be in Congress, but it's up to her constituents to vote her out after a performance like that. What Jeffrey's referring to is not Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, who was followed by a Fox Business News reporter and refused to take her questions. All right, there's been backlash against that group, Jeffrey, and rightfully so, and rightfully earned. I do want to shift our conversation a little bit because there was clearly an intelligence failure here in Israel. And I'm not looking to do the blame game. It's way too early for that. But it does appear that in this area, maybe you could describe it for our audience, it appears to me it was somewhat of a rural type area. Can you shed some light on that for us?
It was a mile or 2 miles away from Gaza. It was really close. Mm-hmm. And they were towns. Ashkelon, Sderot, they were all towns. And they were all, mini cities. So actually the areas for the towns are modern and not rural.
But it's small towns.
Yeah, well, they're small cities.
Yeah.
But if you look at Sderot, usually when they send missiles over, they end up in Sderot, and actually they have a pile of them as a demonstration of what's happening there.
Well, apparently from some early reporting, and again, I'm not going to give away sources and methods, but apparently drones were used to take out some of the communication system that the Israelis had. And apparently Israel has automated sensors, actually machine guns that are operated remotely. And when the communications were knocked out, that knocked out the ability to protect or to alert authorities that something was wrong. So obviously they're going to find out how it happened, why it happened, take corrective steps. But boy, I tell you, one thing was shattered, Jeffrey, besides the near 1,500 lives that have been lost. But the Israelis had a reputation as, from a security standpoint, of second to none. And right now that image has been shattered. I think it will come back as the world sees how Israel reacts to this, though.
I think it will go back to just before the 67 war, where they were seen as a peaceful country and not very strong and surrounded by people who hated them.
Well, at one point earlier this week, they were fighting battles on three fronts: in Gaza, in the north with Hezbollah, and even to the east. Yeah, I mean, that's a tough, the country is secure right now, but even I saw earlier today where they were still locating a handful of terrorists, arresting them, locking them up.
It's still sending rockets.
Yeah, rockets are still coming in. Look, those intelligence failures will be dealt with, but for right now, it does seem like the unity government has the country united, and this country is going to move forward and put itself, if you take Netanyahu at his words in an ominous warning, they are going to leave no stone untouched in this, because you cannot have a country where it's constantly under a barrage of missiles and subhuman animals are crossing the fence, killing babies, killing women, killing elderly. It just you can't exist under that type of scenario. And I think the Israelis have come to the conclusion that complete eradication is the only answer.
There's been issues where Israel was very split on, like the Supreme Court one. And as soon as the rockets came over, everybody came together, and those issues went away.
Yeah.
The war is over. They're going to start fighting again.
Yeah. Well, we'll stay in constant review, and we'll talk a little bit next week about the response, because the news is going to be coming fast and furious every day. Let me shift, Jeffrey, to domestic politics for a minute. The Republican Party put forth Steve Scalise. It does not appear Scalise has the votes, and I'm seeing certain news reports that despite winning that vote in the Republican conference, Scalise may be withdrawing because there's 20 or 30 people that will not vote for him. In your opinion, where does this race stand right now?
I think it's still split. I haven't heard that Scalise might drop out. I know that Jordan had a slight advantage. I think either one of them would be a very good speaker. Different states, Jordan would bash you in the head and Scalise would get it with honey, but they both get it.
I'm not so certain that's the case. I'll take a little bit of point of disagreement with you here. I think with 20 or 30 people that will not vote for Steve Scalise, I think someone else will probably be put forward. There's a lot of people that won't vote for him because he was McCarthy's his right-hand guy. The Republicans are going to have to get this right. I think Steve Scalise would have been a good speaker. My preference was Jim Jordan, but we'll see if that ends up playing out, or if it could end up being somebody else. But I think they need to pretty much stay in conference and get this worked out no later than this weekend. I would like to have them come in for business, on Monday with a speaker in hand.
Because they can't have any business without a speaker.
Can't do anything. Well, yeah. And, there's going to be bills for these, to support Israel and to support Ukraine. I'm not editorializing right, wrong, or indifferent. I'm just saying there is bipartisan support for this military assistance, but it is going to require us to have a speaker, to make that happen.
You can't even pay the military.
Well, Well, no, they've got the budget already approved up through a certain period of time, but passing additional spending bills requires the legislative process, and they can't move forward until they get a speaker. So I'm optimistic.
Remember when Obama, same thing happened, and they closed all the parks and all the monuments, and everybody got angry at that.
I think we're well past that. That's so petty compared to what the issues we're dealing with right now. I mean, that was juvenile, but these are serious issues we're dealing with right now. You know, funding to Israel, funding for Ukraine. Again, some people have different thoughts on the Ukraine situation. The Israeli situation is, outside of those 4 squad people, I haven't heard any opposition to it. So this will get done, but it can't get done until they get a speaker.
But there are other things the country is facing that they got to handle also.
Well, but again, the need to get a speaker before you can start dealing with the business. Look, presidential politics, Jeffrey, let's talk about that just a little bit. You know, polling came out showing whether it's Trump or DeSantis, they're neck and neck with Joe Biden, despite the fact that Biden has still a 41% approval rating, a 53% disapproval, and the country clearly right track, wrong tracks, like 22 right track, 68 wrong track. Nikki Haley, on the other hand, she has a 4-point lead over Biden in this particular poll. As I see it, okay, a lot of people are saying that's great news, great news. To me, it's no news. I mean, Nikki Haley, who certainly qualified for the job, successful governor, UN ambassador, she's respected by many people. I don't think anyone would worry having her as president. The problem is for her, in the early primary states, Donald Trump leads by 30 points. So while the anti-Trump media wants to tout, well, look where Nikki Haley's going. Well, effectively her and DeSantis are vying for second place right now. Those early primary states, you know, again, Iowa, caucus state, New Hampshire primary, South Carolina, Trump's up by 30. And we've only seen 2 marginal candidates, Jeffrey, drop out of the race. Will Hurd and the mayor of Miami, Mayor Sanchez, who didn't even qualify for the debate. So you're not having any of the debate participants drop out. And this almost looks to me like a complete replay of 2016, where it's Donald Trump and everybody else.
Well, I am very worried, because the reason why it's very close between Biden and Trump is because people don't like Trump either. I mean, there's a base that likes him, but there's a larger group that doesn't. And I am worried if he's the nominee that the Republicans won't do well.
Well, I mean, all of us are worried that could happen. Now, the sad thing about it is when you look back at Trump's policies, again, we didn't have 2 wars raging, one in Europe and one in the Middle East. We had inflation running less than 2.5%. We had gas prices, most of the country under $3 here on the West Coast in the 4s. And we didn't have this deluge of crime everywhere. And we didn't have people just overwhelming the border like we have now. And you had the Trump administration negotiate the Abraham Accords, which was getting Israel and the Saudis closer together. And when the Iranians threatened to do something in the United States, they killed Soleimani. So, I mean, it seems to me it's more of a personality type issue. But the fact of the matter is, independent voters will decide this election in 8 or 9 states.
Right.
And I mean, that's the way it's going to be. You can listen to polls all you want, media, this, media. How Donald Trump fares with independent voters in 8 or 9 states will determine if he's the next president or if it's Joe Biden. So,
opposite of Obama. Obama could screw up, but everybody thought he was a nice guy.
They thought he was competent, at least.
Well, but when you looked at the personality stuff, they liked him. Trump had great policies, and people aren't crazy about his personality.
Throw in 91 indictments and you might have another issue, because some of the country that brings them up more close to support Trump, another part won't. Anyhow, it's marginal. So my point being, Jeffrey, a Trump-Biden race, which should not be close, statistically is a tie. Now, I've seen some polling showing Trump up in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. Maybe. We'll see. But he is certainly well on his way, despite the gains by Nikki Haley and DeSantis' emphasis on Iowa. Again, you're up by 30, not like 10 or 15. He's up 30 in these states. So that's how the presidential race is right now. I do want to talk a little bit about my home state, Jeffrey. In the state of Kentucky, there's a race for governor, and the incumbent governor, Steve Beshear, who has a pretty good approval rating in the state, a ruby red state, Kentucky, Beshear's getting about 20% of support from Republicans, and he's leading in the polls over the Attorney General Daniel Cameron, who's a Mitch McConnell protege. This is one of those cases where Steve Beshear is not your typical liberal Democrat. If I could put him in that conservative Democratic bucket, I would, although he's very liberal on some policies. But here's a case where it's going to be a test to see how that Supreme Court decision on abortion affects people voting. Because, and the reason I bring this up, and this came from a Chuck Todd article I read earlier, which he is correct on. Every year that the state of Kentucky has elected a governor, because we elect in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, they elect the governor in odd years like 2023, 2019. It's 1 year before the presidential election. Since 2000, every time they've elected a Republican, we've elected a Republican to the White House. Every time a Democrat has been elected, a Democrat's won the White House. That's why it's sort of like a bellwether election to keep an eye on. And my feeling is it's going to be very close. But Beshear has a favorable rating in Kentucky, and he's an incumbent. He beat Matt Bevin back before and won the governorship. His father was the governor of Kentucky, a Democrat, so he's a well-known commodity. It's going to be tough to pull off the upset here, but that could, forecast what could happen in 2024, because with all the issues seemingly in Republicans' favor, a porous border, high inflation, high crime, 2 wars now going on across the globe, $1 trillion deficits.
How we left Afghanistan.
I didn't bring that up, but yes, I could have brought that up too. Still, this is going to be a razor-thin election. With all of that, your thoughts?
Well, abortion is a big issue with the women, okay, with female voters. But the other thing is, like I said, people like Trump's policies, but they don't like Trump. I don't understand it, because I vote for a president to do a good job. He's not coming over for dinner, whoever it is. And I think that's the issue. Trump would have won in 2020 if he stopped tweeting people. Well, I'm not joking, but
possibly.
He was the mad tweeter. And if he wasn't, I think that he would have been respected enough that he would have won.
Well, he's got his work cut out for him. He's up by 30 right now. We are barreling towards what looks like a Trump-Biden rematch, and we don't know how many independent candidates will run. You have RFK running as an independent. You got Cornel West running as an independent. You have the No Labels Party considering putting candidates out there. We'll see how it plays itself out. One final thing economically I want to talk about. Ironically, this ties in also to my home city of Louisville. The Ford, the UAW, is now picketing that auto plant there in Louisville. That is Ford's most profitable plant on the planet, and is going to have a negative effect. Ford stock price was way down today. Jeffrey, these contract negotiations and strikes not helping the U.S. economy right now.
Yep. And Ford's profits are way down for another reason. They started investing in electric vehicles and no one bought them.
Well,
But I'm
that's
not
true.
joking.
It's not no one, but they did. They produced a lot more than they participated selling. But this
And now they have to strike, and it's going to hurt the economy with everything else that's hurting the economy.
Well, I bring this up because, again, with all these other issues pending out there, the consumer price index came out, it was 3.7%, little bit higher than people anticipated. Inflation's been coming down, but it's still lingering in that 3.5% to 4% range. And what that means, Jeffrey, is rates, they may not go up much more, maybe a quarter, I don't know, we'll see. But they are going to stay higher for longer, and that will eventually bleed into the economy. Jeffrey, final thoughts. We got about a minute. We got about a minute or two left on the overall situation.
It's still higher than salary increases, so that's hurting that's hurting people. It's like I always say that the key issue is being able to put food on your table.
Jeffrey, you have a lot of ties into Israel. How do you see this playing out over the next few weeks?
Emotionally, if you read Genesis chapter 12, God's telling Moses to go to Israel, and I'm going to make you a great people behind it. I still believe that. And if you look at the history, the only reason why it's called Palestine is because the Romans were pissed off at the Judeans, okay, for attacking them three times. So there was never a Palestine owned by Palestinians. Okay, what do I see? Israel's going to win the war. They have to. Israel's going to at least get the leadership of Hamas, but the media is still going to screw it up because Israel isn't fighting the Palestinians; they're fighting Hamas, and that's different. It's not the whole area, and people are saying Israel is fighting the Muslims. No, they're fighting terrorists. Part of the Jewish religion is to lay off other faiths. Okay, so that would be against what they do. So what do I think? I think it's going to take a long time, but I think at the end, Israel will win.
I'll add a closing comment to it and echo what I said earlier. I don't think Israel will stop until every piece of leadership, equipment, building of Hamas is completely destroyed, just like ISIS was destroyed. There will be a massive rebuilding in what remnants are left of the Gaza Strip, and I believe that this operation will be successful, and I think that the Israeli people have reached a point where the criticism that may come from left-wingers, it's going to go on deaf ears, because a country has a right to exist. They will do the right thing as they are right now, but I concur with you. Eventually, they will get where they need to be, and with a lot of support from the U.S., and we can only hope that the outcome turns out to be what Netanyahu is forecasting. Jeffrey, thank you for joining me today, and pleasure speaking to you, particularly about this subject, because you're very close to it. I know that, and I want to thank you for your insights today.
Thank you. I got another 10 hours of doing work.
You could, for certain. Folks, a lot of breaking news going to be happening every day. We'll be back with you on Tuesday. We'll dissect everything that's happening. We pray for the people of Israel, and we pray that these terrorists are decimated and that the Israelis are successful in their military operation. Have a great weekend. We will see you on Tuesday.